we're going to put an element of L&D on trial every month in the cryptically named L&D on trial. So first up we have learning styles. God, I've decided to defend learning styles, so this is going to be interesting. Shall I go first?
You give it a go, because you're going to need all the support and the advantage you can get. Oh, he's getting the whiteboard now. He's getting the whiteboard. Here we go.
Okay. We've all got a learning style, haven't we? No? Okay. It's like an idiot. I've chosen to defend learning styles. And so here we go. Here's a quick potted history of learning styles. So, David A. Kolb, an American educational theorist born in 1939, came up with the idea of learning styles in 1974. 4 different learning styles: accommodator, feeling, doing; diverger, feeling, watching; assimilator, thinking, watching; and converger, thinking and doing. The idea that people like to learn in different ways. This was slightly changed later to become strengths rather than preferences, but at this point it was that people have a preference for a certain style of learning. Peter Honey and Alan Mumford built on this with their learning styles, probably some of the best known, which was pragmatist, theorist, reflector, and activist. So activists like problem solving, group discussion, puzzles; pragmatists like case studies. It's falling apart around me, isn't it? Theorists like stories, models, stats, quotes, that sort of thing; and reflectors like self-analysis, questionnaires, interviews. And then Walter Burke Barb probably came up with certainly the modalities that we're most familiar with when we talk about learning styles, which is visualizing, auditory, and kinesthetic, which was then built on by Neil Fleming in 1987, who added in read/writing, which is unfortunately quite heavily linked to NLP. So, yeah, I think what do I think? For the purposes of the argument, I think it's possible that people have individual learning styles. There was a great letter in The Guardian in response to a very much longer letter by 30 or 40 professors from around the UK and further afield, in fact, saying who denounced learning styles, but then a few other professors, it was the battle of the professors, came back and said, no, there's a place for learning styles. I think it's best summed up at the in this comment here, which is, where is it? We'll edit this. Or will we? A possible.
Maybe
here we
you don't
go.
have a very visual learning style, and that's why you're struggling to find it.
Here we go. Professor Harold Beckering of the Donders Institute for Brain, Cognition and Behaviour, no less, in Nijmegen, Netherlands. Just perfect pronunciation. He said, a possible negative side effect of this learning style debunking is that teachers neglect individual differences rather than contemplating how to exploit them to improve learning at the individual level in an optimal manner. And I couldn't have put it better myself, and I didn't. The case rests. The prosecution, the defence rests.
So that's your one point, okay? Whereas I've got like maybe 4 main points of my argument to come through. So, I mean, I've been gifted this one really to kind of highlight that learning styles is completely rubbish and well denounced. I think some really interesting stuff. There is a report by the Educational Endowment Foundation in the UK. So this was around kind of using learning styles from a school perspective. And they concluded that learning styles is low impact for very low cost based on limited evidence. I'd argue about low cost and low impact because actually it's made quite a big impact, but that's something that they've come up with. Also, I think it's really interesting that, and this is from a Steve Wheeler article actually, that he points out a really, really important point, and this is around the kind of the scientific validity of research. He says that not only was the concept of learning style so ill-defined as to be virtually useless in pedagogical terms, the instruments used to determine the student learning styles were flawed. They failed to measure accurately what they were purported to measure, and that's the validity construct we have in scientific research. And they failed to measure the learning styles consistently over time. So there's no reliability kind of element there. So that's my second point going on. My third point, which is possibly scientifically one of my favourites, and this is from some research done by Harold Pashler, Mark McDaniel, Doug Rohrer and Robert Bjork about learning styles concept and evidence. And what they say is a very few studies have used an experimental methodology capable of testing the validity of learning styles applied to education. Moreover, for those that did use an appropriate method, actually several found that the results were flatly contradicted popular hypotheses. So that's a really interesting point there too. I can see just John sweating and going, yeah, I've lost this one. And possibly my favourite one is to quote Donald P. Clark. Now, Don is always well known for really strong and interesting views, and I can't say I disagree with necessarily all of them, or any of them sometimes. And the one I really like from one of his many blogs that he's written on this kind of subject is that he says this scheme, learning styles, is far too simple and heavily criticised by neuroscientists and professional psychologists as being at best a gross simplification, and at worst it's misleading and wrong. I rest my case.
Well, I think we need to get some feedback as well. So a compelling argument there, Jo. Might have to concede this one, but it'd be interesting to hear what you think. So do get in touch via Twitter at Training Journal, or by email as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And also we can discuss this on our Training Journal forum too. It'd be interesting to see people kind of referencing any research and evidence, but also to your point, John, about, okay, learning styles maybe are wrong, but actually that concept of using different methodologies for teaching appropriate to the content and the audience, and making sure that we do focus on individual needs, that's an important one.
Do you think there's anything to be said for there's got to be something to be said for the idea of mixing up the training with other types of media, rather than say it all being face-to-face, it all being video, all being audio, group work, etc., etc. I mean, that's not saying that people have a learning style, but it does play into the idea that these are relevant types of learning maybe for everyone.
Absolutely, and absolutely that should happen, because if you do just one thing all the time, you know, that's going to get boring. It's not going to get your point across. You're not going to capture people's imagination, engagement, and so on. But what this is about, what this trial is about, is saying, well, where is the research and the evidence to support a specific thing? So we're not putting on trial blended learning or kind of using technology in learning or anything like that. That's a separate topic with its own research that we need to look at another day. But you're right, mixing it up and doing different things for different learners, but it's appropriate to the content, the context, the learner, the environment, what you need them to do. All of that is important, rather than tick box, I've done a video, go me, I've engaged the visual learners. It's not that simple.
Okay, well, I'll get you next time, Gadget.